Fascinating. W0ASP mobile.
Thanks all. Good evening. This is N7GES, and I guess it is time for our NCARC TechNet, sponsored by the Northern Colorado Amateur Radio Club. We meet to share ideas, opinions, suggestions, ask questions. Any point on here is acceptable, and to discuss in a very civilized and respectful way. We will remind you that our sessions are being recorded and also streamed for people to watch via YouTube as it happens, and to review later. So just keep that in mind. Don't be self-conscious, but keep it in mind as you participate in the net. Let's start with a few check-ins. Let's see who's listening this evening. Give me your call sign phonetically, if you would, and your name, and that's probably sufficient for the time being.
Good evening, Kevin. This is November 0, Echo, Mike, Papa, Greg, Fort Collins.
This is KE0, Oscar X-Ray Victor Scott, Fort Collins. Good evening, Kevin.
Good evening, Kevin. This is Whiskey 0 Alpha Sierra Papa, Terry, Mobile, Northern Boulder County.
Right. Very good evening and welcome to W0ASP, KE0OXV, and N0EMP. Greg, I'm expecting will probably be doing some of the presenting this evening. But I hope I have a few others as well. Others, please.
Kilo Oscar 6 Romeo Mike, Jeremy. I'll be here for a little bit this evening.
This is Kilo Echo 0 November Hotel Bravo, Mark, Boulder, and I'll be here for a shortened period.
This is Kilo Echo 0 Papa Uniform Quebec, Bill, Loveland.
This is Whiskey 0 Romeo Delta Charlie, Rob, around Owl Canyon.
All right, we're slowly gaining members. Welcome to W0RDC, KE0PUQ, KE0NHB, and KO6RM. And I understand some of you have to leave a little early, so I do hope that we'll have a chance for you to participate as you choose. Let's go ahead and talk about our topic just a little bit here. and we'll take other check-ins as they come in. So you do not have to be checked in to make comments or participate. So just understand that check-ins are not closed. So tonight, and my apologies for not getting it posted to the web page. I am sorry. It's been a ridiculous week, and it just seems like I say that every day these last several weeks. So I keep hoping that at some point that will stop, but so far it hasn't. Tonight's topic was as discussed last week, was if I offer to volunteer to help out with communications for an event, a race, a marathon, some other sorts of things, what might I be expected to do? What sorts of training do I need? What sorts of equipment do I need? Do I have to be concerned about legalities, things I can communicate, things that I may not be able to communicate or not supposed to communicate, and areas that I probably need to be careful of joining into? We hope that our event managers will be conscious of those things, but it's always a good idea for us to be conscious of those as well. Now, I'm not talking so much emergency communications here, although emergencies could certainly arise during these communications, these events, I should say. So at this point, what we're probably talking more about is a routine event, public event, where we're assisting with communications to assist the event directors and managers and that sort of thing. Greg, let me open it up to you to just give your comments of any kind, and then we'll just continue discussion. N0EMP and 7GES.
Good evening, Kevin and the group. N0EMP. I have not run any events myself. I've volunteered to participate in a lot of them over the last 3 years. Always had a great time doing it. It's a great way to get out and have some fresh air and hopefully some sunshine, and use your equipment out in the field a little bit and see what it can do in some different environments. All of the events that NCARC sponsors or helps support are very well organized from a communications point of view and from an event point of view as well. There's usually a very senior member of the club, very experienced, who has been coordinating the radio portion for several years and knows what's going on. And they can place an individual into a position where they can be useful, and they will evaluate that person's equipment and their experience and decide where best to place them. There are events that NCARC supports that have locations where all you need is an HT, and maybe a spare battery would be nice, depending on if you're working all day or taking part of a short shift. There are other locations where it would be better to have a vehicle with a mobile radio and either a mag mount or roof mount antenna. And there are a couple events with 1 or 2 locations where it would be nice to have about a 10-foot pole with a small Yagi on it. To just because they're in a tight spot. Again, the people that have been running the events, running the radio portion of these events for years, know what kind of experience level and equipment is needed at what location. And I highly recommend participating just to get the experience. And I've always had a good time when I go out and do that. As far as legality, we can't be paid to provide communications. So, having someone write you a check, hey, here you go, thanks, here's some money, that is probably not good. However, a lot of these events have catered food, which we're welcome to partake in as a participant in the event, and that's fine. Some groups that we support do a lunch or a cookout sometime during the summer on a different date than the event, and they'll send invites out to people that supported it as volunteers, and those invites go out not only to the radio volunteers but to the trail marshals and the sweepers and everybody else. So I don't think there's a conflict there either. As far as legality of what you can transmit, of course, the normal rules apply. Of course, you wouldn't be transmitting profanity or anything like that. You wouldn't be supporting any illegal activity. If we end up here in a few years in Colorado having the marathon or the marijuana marathon, you might not want to have ham radio support that because there's a federal law against that sort of thing. If there is an emergency, especially an injury or a medical problem, then there's some rules about HIPAA and what you can transmit or not regarding a specific identified individual and a medical condition or injury that they might have. So if you get into that situation, you would not want to transmit any type of personal identifying information like name, date of birth, social security number. Some of the organizations like the MS-150 have real clear written policies on that, which are actually part of the comm plan, and that's a good thing to review regardless of what event you're going to support. James can get that. James Cizik, Israel KN, can get you that information. But as I understand it, it's okay to say there's a 33-year-old male with a possible fractured ankle. Or, that would be okay as I understand it, but you wouldn't put a name or date of birth or anything out there. Have I hit all the points, Kevin? And 0 EMP.
Heavens, yes. I think you covered everything that I was thinking of, and I'm sure there'll be other things that will come up in the questions as well. Let me just expound on what might we be doing, and you can help me on this as well. And this comes from my experiences with some of the races. A lot of what we've done is let the race managers know when various people have crossed certain areas or come past certain areas in order to help them know that we may need to look for somebody or check on various people's whereabouts. And the way that we've done this in the past, in the events that I've been involved in, was by bib number or, whatever bib number, back number, whatever it is that everybody has. And so that we're just reporting numbers back, or net control might ask you, has anybody seen a number so and so, or that sort of thing. Greg, anything to add to that?
DUS.
Stand by, DUS. Do you have an emergency?
No, I just want to add something I think Greg forgot about, identifying injured parties.
Roger. Let me get Greg's question, and then I'll come back to you if that's okay.
Okay.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, typically, you're correct, Kevin. They'll usually want to know the first male participant's bib number, first female, and they'll want to get an idea of when the last person. Sometimes they want the first 3 males, first 3 females, and then typically they want to know when the last group comes through, the last couple people. And some events, the course has what they call sweepers, which are people that are deliberately being the last, and they are maybe picking up trail marker flags and stuff like that, but they're either running or jogging or riding bicycles behind the pack, and they make sure everyone's in front of them. So they'll want to know usually when the sweepers come through your checkpoint. And other than that, it's just generally if you're working an aid station, if they need more water, they need more electrolyte, they need more Gatorade, more ice, just to get that out so that they can truck it up to you. And you know, barring an emergency or an injury, that's usually it. N0 EMP.
Okay, thank you. In KF4DUS, go ahead. KF4DUS, are you still with us?
Yeah, my radio is getting wet. Standing out here with Duke waiting. Anyway, in the past, when I've worked events, it seemed okay for the race coordinator to ask for the participant's bib number in an emergency. I assume that's still okay. In lieu of a name, of course, it's not okay.
KC0ZIE checking in.
ZIE, thank you. Stand by for just a moment. Mike, was that a question or was there more to it there?
It's a question.
Okay, sorry. It didn't quite sound like you were finished. All right, ZIE, I'll bet you're probably ready to answer that here.
Oh, I think so. I've only got a few minutes, which I've been trying to get in, but do have a few comments. I've run a fair number of these events. And our biggest purpose for being out there is safety of the runners and participants. So that's why we track who's crossed which aid stations, making sure we haven't lost anybody between aid stations, and also if we have any reports of injuries, getting help back out to those folks. So that's really the main reason that we have radio out there, and these are primarily events where cell phone coverage does not exist or is spotty at best. And then as far as to Mike's question, some of what Greg was saying, definitely bib numbers are the way to go because most of the aid stations have a way of translating that back into a person's name and contact information, and we can start the ball rolling there to get that person help, and it also keeps it anonymous on the air.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Canford to US. I have to go inside now.
Very good, Mike. Thank you. Thank you, Darren. Anything else you want to add to what we've already discussed since you've got to take off here?
Like I said, safety is the main reason we're out there, and that's, keeping in the ideas of amateur radio and the reasons that we have licenses. Let's see, there was one other thing I wanted to mention, and it's escaping me now.
Okay, well, hopefully you'll think of it before you leave us. Do we have any other comments or questions from anybody at this time? And this is N7GES with the TechNet.
N0NYY.
Evening, NYY, go ahead.
In addition to checking in with myself and Gene, N0QXQ, under the heading of legality, I would like to mention tactical call signs, which have some substantial advantages where, as opposed to saying N0NYY every time, I might say Aid 1 or Aid 2, whatever station I am, or Firehouse, wherever I am. The advantage to that is it allows net control to not have to think about, oh wait, where's Bart? He's over here. Okay, yeah, that's what he meant. He has to go through that thought train. Meanwhile, the conversation has moved on. The big advantage is that the guy standing next to Kevin that really needs to know, who's not a ham and has no clue who I am from Adam, knows that Aid Station 1 needs or has or whatever type of thing there. Perfectly legal to use tactical call signs as long as you do the required call sign ID every 10 minutes. N0NYY.
ZIE?
Go ahead, ZIE.
Definitely agree with Bart on the advantage of tacticals. And typically the way we run that to make sure that everybody stays legal is we call it tactical in, call sign out. So when you're calling net control, you give them your tactical sign, and when you're done speaking, you've communicated what you need to say, you give your call sign, and that's the cue to net control that you're done.
That's actually new to me. It's been quite a while, and I like it. Thank you, N0NYY.
And works well, especially since you don't know for sure how long it might be before you come back in again. So if you don't utilize that opportunity to get your ID in, it could be that it wouldn't happen right away. But it's very easy if you've got to make a report to say GES and get a recognition net control says GES go, or aid station net control 8 station 1, 8 station 1 go. I have such and such. Thank you. N7GES clear. And that is just an example of that. Okay, do we have any questions from anybody that might be interested in doing this and hasn't done this? Have we swamped you too much with info, or have we excited you? Any comments or questions?
KD0, WBC.
Good evening, Pete, WBC.
Sorry, late check-in, but I hate to be the guy, but one more thing. As an equine vet that has worked a lot of equine events, you guys may not do that. We do a lot of endurance rides, and amateur radio is very helpful because they are long-distance rides where cell phones do not work. HIPAA does not apply to animals, but animal name and owner name is also protected. So when you call out for assistance at an aid station for a problem with a horse, the horse's name and owner should not be verbally put over the radio. The bib number or the horse number is better.
Okay, thank you very much for that info. That sort of helps to, that sort of takes the guesswork out of it, is just keeping any identifiable information out of the mix. So that's good. Thank you. Anybody else?
EMP.
EMP, go ahead.
Excuse me. Yeah, one other thing Darren reminded me of, one piece of information they want to know is if somebody drops out of the event. Again, by bib number. Depending on the event, there may be vehicles usually called a SAG vehicle or a SAG wagon that will pick up people that have dropped out of the race or dropped out of the event, and they use us to either call for that vehicle because they need someone picked up, or also to advise the event controller that bib number so-and-so has sagged out or left the course at such and such a station. The other thing, as far as skill level for us, the radio operators, sometimes things change during the event in unforeseen ways, so it's a good idea to be able to manually program your radio in the field, including being able to manually program a repeater including the tone. The tone may change on the repeater during the event. There might be a problem where they have to change the repeater tone. So you should be able to do that, and you should be able to program in and operate simplex on your equipment and 0 EMP.
Okay. Anybody out here that has not provided communications and thinks they might like to try it at some point? I'd just kind of like to get a quick check. Just give me the suffix of your call, your tactical call, in other words.
NHB, I'm very interested, and I will be contacting off of the web pages the person in control.
Well, thank you very much.
IRC, Bill?
Any questions you have for any of us at this point? Even though most of us are not the event communications coordinators, unless Darren is still here, but we might still be able to answer some questions there.
Yes, I'm still here, but on an HT.
NHB, well, no, the only, I figure that once I make contact with the coordinator, that there'll probably be a pre-meeting on that, and to get more specific information. That's what I'm assuming at this point.
It's going to depend a little bit on the event and the skill level of the folks operating. as to whether we have a pre-meeting or not. Some of the time we'll pair you up with somebody that has worked these before, and that kind of brings me to another subject, that nobody out there should be hesitant in any way to going out and doing an event. Just be sure that you communicate with the event coordinator your skill level, how many you've done, if you're comfortable with it, and we'll get you paired up or at simpler locations, and we will make it work. We're all in the business of having a successful event. So, and also bringing up the skill level of all of the operators in the area. So it's a great way to give back and a way to build your skill set. KC0, ZIE.
Kilo Echo 0 NHB. Yeah, thank you for that, and that actually makes it feel a lot nicer. Because I am a Hamlet, and so I would want some additional instructions at that point. So, thank you very much, but I've got to go now. Kilo Echo 0 November Hotel Bravo, Mark Boulder, we're clear.
And Mark, just to let you know, when I've worked with Darren before, we haven't actually so much had a meeting, but he's sent out quite a bit of documentation via email. And, of course, he's available for asking questions. So, yeah, by the time you get there, you pretty much know what's going on. So, yes, glad to have you. All right, any other questions or comments?
KO6RM.
Good evening, Jeremy. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I have helped with other events in other locations, but they were mainly very close together. For mountain events, what type of technologies do you use to keep people talking? Repeaters, APRS, etc.?
Zero NYY.
NYY, let me just ask Darren real quick if he wants to go into detail about what we have used, and then I'll come back to you there.
Thanks, Kevin. I will go ahead and take that and say yes, we use all of them. Anything we can, whatever is appropriate to the event. We have some events that we run simplex that are short enough or have enough line of sight communication that we can work that. We do some through repeaters, and we also make use of APRS on some events. So it's really a mishmash of whatever the event and the location requires. There's one event up near Gould that we do in the summer that we put a portable repeater up on the mountaintop and use that to serve most of the race course. And then there are a few locations that are simplex, 8 station to 8 station to the repeater.
Very cool. Yeah, one of the events that I helped out with in California was a whaleboat regatta, and the event course was only about 300 yards long, so simplex was just fine. But when we're talking about mountains and endurance running and whatnot, I can understand that technologies change. Thank you, KO6RM.
Absolutely. Okay, back. Bart, N0 NYY, go ahead, please.
Way back in the old days, shortly after tubes, just kidding, when we lived here before, we did some events that were up in the mountain territory. A couple of techniques that were incredibly helpful were radios that could cross band link, where I could go down a canyon with a simplex 2-meter frequency back up to my vehicle, which had a beam antenna pointed back at a 440 repeater. Actually, I think it was vice versa, but regardless, you can do it any way you want to. You put a beam antenna on a vehicle radio and find just the right spot, and it's amazing how well you can get back into a repeater from that vehicle. As soon as you got to get away from the vehicle and go down into the canyon somewhere, you lose that capability. So the vehicle with a crossband link and a directional antenna out to the repeater can be a very, very helpful thing. A lot of details that you have to pay attention to when you do that, but it's extremely helpful. And I think someone already mentioned portable repeaters, which can, act similarly, but anyway, more on that later on. N0NYY, thank you.
ZIE with a follow-up.
ZIE.
Definitely agree with everything that Bart was saying, but one thing I did want to add to that is the fact that the differences in equipment and the things that we're talking about should not sway anyone away from volunteering, because if you've got the equipment, we're happy to put it to use and let you work with it. Or if you're just interested in helping out and might not have all the equipment, we'll pair you up with somebody that does or get you what you need to be successful at a location. So don't let that scare you away.
Okay, that's a good point too. Some people don't have certain things, and so it's good. Some people may not have, for example, APRS. If that's essential, then people have offered before in other races to get you set up with whatever you need if you don't happen to have it. So there you go. Mobile rigs, the same thing. Most everybody has a mobile rig in their car, but if you don't, or if you need a rig that you can set up somewhere bigger than an HT, there's always people around that can help with that. So yes, don't be concerned that you don't have the right equipment. You just need your license and the willingness to be there. Any other comments before I ask my next question here?
WBC?
Yes, with the TechNet.
W0ASP?
ASP, go ahead.
Kevin, I'd like to make a little comment about some of my volunteer work, particularly involving security at these different events. I attempted to volunteer for the Boulder race to help with volunteer communications, and I was not so politely said, no thank you, because you had to be a member of the Boulder Areas group, properly security vetted, to participate in that event. And I suspect this may become an increasing issue. W0ASP.
Okay. Thank you for that info. And there are probably situations where that certainly could come into play, all right. So I would imagine with most of our race situations, especially where it's not a security matter, that shouldn't come up. But certainly with ARES and Oxcom and things like that that are now coming up, and we won't go into all those definitions tonight, but that's probably something we should cover later. Some of that might change for at least certain events, especially in emergencies or in any group that's being coordinated by ARES or something of that nature, I suspect. Thank you, Terry. Appreciate that. Anything else before I go on?
WBC?
KD02YU.
Okay, we got two. Good evening, Joe, but I'm going to send WBC Pete, go ahead first.
Sorry, one quick question. I was just curious, where do you post your volunteer opportunities for radio communications for these events?
It would be on the NCARC webpage, I'm sorry. Are they on the front page, or do we have to click somewhere for those?
Hey, Kevin, they're actually on the front page under the schedules and stuff.
Okay, so and also they're announced on the Wednesday evening nets a lot too, especially if something is coming up right away. So yeah, between those two things, I think you should be well informed there, Pete. Okay, 80TYU, good evening. What you got for me?
I want to go get back to Terry. Terry, as you know, I'm the EC for Laramie and Weld County. Tell me about this boulder. What was this deal?
Hi, Joe. Well, 2 years ago, my wife was running in the race and in the boulder, and I had participated in a number of races down Longmont and the 40 and the Fort and so forth, and I wanted to volunteer to operate to participate in the boulder for their race support. And like I said, I was not so kindly told no.
Really? Well, I don't know of any event up here that you would have that issue at all. And the boulder, I kind of know the guy that runs that. That surprises me. Have you tried lately, or anything that's like within the last year or so?
No, and quite frankly, I'm not going to try again.
Well, I'm sorry you had that problem. If you run into that again, kind of let me know, and I'll do some checking, because I'm surprised you have to be an Aries member to run a race. I mean, shoot, that doesn't make much sense. But okay, I was just curious. Thanks, Kevin, for letting me know. I've never heard that before.
Okay, Joe. Yeah, it rather surprised me too. But I've got better places to contribute my time and energy.
Well, I think we've been fairly careful about not turning people away, and so I don't think that'll happen here, as you know. And for any people, new people coming up, if it does happen, there's probably a very specific reason, and we would certainly explain that politely and nicely. And I would hope that it would be clear why, and not a dismissal impolitely made. So there you go. Very good. Joe, anything to add to all this at this point?
Well, I just want to reassure anybody out there, this Katie's at TYU. I am, of course, EC and also club president of a couple clubs. Aware of that goes on up here from the MS 150 all the way through the little stuff that we do for the regular bike clubs and things like that you actually need that. And I'm really surprised at the boulder because there's really not an issue there. The only time we might get into trouble is if we assign an EC to someone like someone who hasn't had a background check or something like that, and even that is questionable. So I'm sorry, Terry, you had that problem, but I guarantee it won't happen on this side of the fence. So I do apologize. But anybody wants to jump in fact, we really look for volunteers. So nothing else. Thanks so much, Kevin.
Okay, very good. This is N7GES, and this is the NCARC TechNet. Not so much a technical issue, but certainly technicalities in operations. So I think that qualifies. And we did at least have one person already this evening who was interested. I forgot to remind you that if you're listening via the stream, you can probably make comments there in the chat page. And if Dave is, I'm sure Dave is probably able to see that and can relay that in. And we are also available on Echolink as well. So you can join us that way. That would be W0UPS-R. So I want to proceed to just to another section here, because I think, again, this is a step up in what you could be asked to do and how you could easily help. And that is, what's involved in net control for these events? Very often the net control shifts from one person to another. And what other qualifications, what other abilities might be utilized or needed in that position? Would anybody like to comment on that before I make my comments, perhaps? Well, I'm going to make a stab at it, but my experience is not as extensive as some others on here, so I hope that we'll get some more folks to chime in. I think one of the big things that is required from a net control is at least being able to hear and record the information that you get, so that you can accurately communicate that information to whoever is needing it from your area, which you're probably going to be communicating with some of the headquarters or main coordinators or that sort of thing. So I think that would be the very first thing I would say. The next would be knowing where people are, at least where the various areas are that we're communicating with, so that we know when we hear from somebody where they're at in the race, so that we have some clue as to where their supplies might be going that they request, where they are in the race, if they're seeing runners, where they are if we need a sag wagon to get to them, and that's more general terms, because they're going to be at certain waypoints along the race, and those waypoints are known to the race coordinators as well, but still it's helpful to have some idea where those are, so that you have some idea which direction the race is moving and going. And usually there will be maps to help with that kind of a purpose, I'm sure. I mention it because I have to do a lot of memorization, but I think usually there are adequate information available for you to look at and get that kind of info. All right, anybody else want to add to this?
80 TYU.
TYU, go ahead.
Yeah, most of the events that we run around here are either bicycle races or foot races. And normally, whoever's going to run net control is somewhat available to some person who is actually running the event, whether it be their control person or just anybody. And there's a lot of running around. There's a lot of reporting that you have to do to these people. Net control is actually fairly easy to run from one of these things because what you're basically looking for is you're looking for people who have got injuries or drop out of races and things like that. And you're also looking for the last runner and things like that, or last bike in this case. Let this drop for a minute. And Kevin, you're absolutely right. You need to kind of spot where these people are at. But it's kind of a crapshoot when you go in there, when you're running one of these things. It's not bad to, if you have been in net control on something like this is a really good practice session, or something like the Wednesday night net or one of the other, the Aries net or something like that. That's a pretty good thing. And when you get into one of these things, it's not, it's a little bit more serious because, well, for instance, Terry and that whole group up there saved us a whole bunch of time with the person that actually got hurt up there. And when you get people like that that are dedicated to that type of thing, that's exactly what anybody needs, and those are the people that you need. So there's a lot of heads-up type things. You have to know where your people are for medical type situations, and where your paramedics are, and what their capabilities are, and various things like that. You also need to know what their operating and radio systems are too, and generally yours is better, but that's what, I hope that helped somebody. So back to net. Thanks much.
ZIE.
ZIE, go.
I'd like to add to what Joe said. A couple of other things that I always find important for net control is priorities. So you've got to keep your priorities straight and remember the safety of the participants is the first thing. And sometimes you've got to tell either the race coordinator or somebody else to just hold on, you're dealing with a situation. And secondly, communicating the right details to the right person. So sometimes you're talking to someone on the air, sometimes you're talking to a park ranger, sometimes you're talking to an EMT, sometimes you're talking to the race director, and just getting everyone on the same page with the same information when they need it. KC0, ZIE, back to net.
Okay, thanks, Darren. Yes, sometimes a lot of things are happening at once, and you pretty much have to handle one communication at a time. So sometimes certain people have to wait, and you do sometimes have to make a very quick decision who's going to be waiting and who's going to be serviced first. That doesn't usually happen in these kind of things, but occasionally it might. Usually your common sense will help you realize which of those has to happen. Any questions on all of this?
EMP.
EMP, go.
Yeah, one other thing, just like the race coordinator wants to make sure everyone that's participating in the race is accounted for, net control or the radio coordinator wants to know all of us are accounted for. So typically it's important and that they will have you check into the net when you physically arrive at your position. And just as important, or even more important, that you check out when you're leaving. They want to make sure they account for everybody getting clear of the event scene, especially if it's up in the mountains somewhere.
And I think I would add to that, because sometimes there are multiple hams at a particular station. It's not just if the station is closed, but all the people that are working there is everybody accounted for. So yeah, it's not a huge difficulty. It's just a little bit of keeping track of who is where, or did people check out and move to other places? And is everybody okay? Thank you. That's a good point. And I'm bringing all this up not to show how difficult net control is at these things, but to show that that is another area that people can help out, because net controls need spelled as well. It may be very difficult for one person to operate net control over a whole event. It may be that net control needs to move from one location to another depending on the event, and different people might be needed. So that's an area you could perhaps help in, and don't be afraid of it. Just get the instructions and watch somebody or get the instructions and just work with it, and there will be always people around to help you out with it as well. So you won't be in a place where you have to worry about making mistakes and not having help.
ZIE.
ZIE, go.
I think you and Greg kind of danced around this, but one of the other things that I always make sure to do when I run one is when I've got folks heading to a location off of the main roads, such as Towers Aid Station or something like that, I'll have people check in when they leave the public roads, and then secondly when they arrive up at the location. That way we know that they have not had some sort of breakdown on a trail or a dirt road back in the woods somewhere. And secondly, if it sounds an awful lot like some stuff, what we heard on Saturday about checking in, checking out, making sure where people are in terms of emergencies and activations, this is exactly what it is. This is practice for emergencies, and the more we do these events, the more prepared our operators are for real emergencies. With that, I will send it back to you, Kevin, and I am at my location, so I will be signing out. KC0ZIE.
Okay, thank you very much, Darren, and a good point. These are good practice sessions because they're probably mostly not high-stress, high-speed situations, and there's time to learn and figure out the techniques that are needed. And all of that applies in an emergency situation, but this is a good place to practice those techniques. Even using tactical calls is kind of an unusual thing, and checking in, checking out, people underestimate how important that is until you've lost somebody in a storm situation. And hey, if we're practicing that in a race situation, and people do get lost in race situations, so it's always a good thing to practice the skills, whether they're desperately needed or not in the particular situation you're working in. All right, once again, I want to open this specifically for questions now. Questions at this time. This is N7GES. Okay, I wonder if Dave or Christy is on the air and has had any feedback that we should that should be related to us via the YouTube stream.
W0DDZ. Nothing on the YouTube stream at this point, Kevin.
WIQ.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Good evening, Carrie.
It would be a good idea if everybody got very familiar with the ITU phonetics, because clear communication is just as important as just plain communication.
That's a good point. They will be necessary not just for calls, but for other things. Badge numbers bib numbers are usually numbers, but there may be other times when something needs to be spelled out, and to make that clear, phonetics are always important, and having those where you can easily access them to read or know them well enough to hear and understand is certainly a good thing. So, good point. Thank you very much, Carrie. Okay, any other comments anybody wants to add here? I'm thinking we're getting close to the end of the topic that we've selected to cover, and but I don't want to leave any comments or questions unaccounted for here.
LCK?
Good evening. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, Kevin, thanks for doing this. And this is KE Sir LCK. Last year was my first year to do several events. I started off with the Colorado Marathon, which was a running event, and where I was stationed, only required all of them. Well, they required HTs there, and I thought it was kind of boring until I found out that they actually had to call in a helicopter up in the canyon because phones didn't work up there, and it was the ham radios that were able to relay that information down to get a person that had a heart attack out of the canyon. After that, I did one for the kids called CAS, Catch a Special Thrill. It's up at the reservoir, and they match up kids with special needs and boat owners, and they actually outfit them and take them out and go fishing, and that was a thrill. So let me take a break here. And that again was just an HT required, and another one I did was a bike race, which was 40 in the Fort up at the state park, and that was more of an administrative rather than tactical pursuit at this particular point in time, where you're keeping track of is it a bib number, first person, first female, whatever the category is. One more break. And unfortunately, Darren's left the net. There was another event called the Horsetooth, which is a boat race up at the reservoir, and that is where they have basically younger people that are physically well fit, and they get into these rowing sculls. Some of them are 2-man, 4-man, 8-man, and they start off and they row from one end of the reservoir to the other, and there's a series of spotters along the way. And he says, "Oh, you want to do net control?" I said, "Huh?" So anyhow, I ended up doing that, and because there's only about 8 or 9 operators, it's not too bad. So I've gone from just a participant with a radio in my hand to running net control, and there's a difference between a net control like tonight, which is basically administrative. One more break. And those which are tactical, where something is happening that can be a life safety issue. You have to be much more aware of what's going on and who's impacted and how things can change so quickly. But the point being, you can start off very slowly. Working these types of nets is a great practice. This or like I mentioned before, the Wednesday night or Aries or even helping out with the peg sometimes is a great thing to do. So from starting out from nothing to actually doing some net control, it was a quick process. It's see one, do one, teach one. Back to net.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I appreciate you offering the encouragement from your experiences. That's terrific, and I had forgotten that you got initiated to net control, but what a great way to do to get started there. And yeah, I would echo the same thing. If you start net control at a race like that, especially some of the slower moving ones, you have an excellent learning opportunity there. But there's plenty of places you can be used. It's fun to meet the people and visit with them. It's just a good experience, and I've certainly always enjoyed it. You do want to come dressed properly. You can get varieties of weather, and as you know, being out in the weather unprepared is not fun. My first outing with Darren at the Quad Rock was a disaster because the cold, misty stuff that we were getting all day was just something my clothing wasn't handling well, and I don't think I thawed out for several weeks after that one. But that was my own fault. I wasn't prepared properly, so there you go. Okay, one last call for comments or questions on this subject, and then I think I'll open it up for general tech questions for a few minutes before we close.
KW0ASP, comment?
Checking in, and I just want to add that Mike, LCK, that was well said. I enjoyed what you were talking about. Back to the net.
Okay, thank you, Phil, and welcome. And ASP, I heard you double with Phil. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry, Phil, but I had to also comment another Mike LCK on his experience and his stories, because I think participating in these kinds of events is a matter of stories and how they affect you and how you have affected the race. And for the 40 on the Fort last year, I have a short story where that demonstrates, why the radio communication is necessary. Because we were up there at Towers, right under the repeater, but it's actually hard to. We were doing simplex net, and it's a little bit hard to communicate up there. And so I had my truck with the 40-watt rig in it, and we were doing crossband from HTs over to the truck so we could hit all the other stations. So there's some technical skill, necessary in that. And it was for a good reason, because we had an injured rider. We had a rider break his collarbone. And then we had to help communicate emergency services, communicate to the race director that we had an injured person. Let me grab a nickel. And we also had to communicate information to friends and family, where this person was going to be going and where they could find him, where his personal belongings were, his car, his keys, and so forth. And that all turned out to be an important part of the race, and that's what we're there for. W0ASP, back to net.
Hey,
let's see if I can get in here on Echolink, KC0QK.
I doubled KC0QOK. Good evening.
Good evening. Interesting lesson. And I got a couple little points. When it's a bigger event, net control should have, most generally has, and if they don't, they should have somebody there, a scribe, to take notes. So that way net control isn't always having to know, where's your sag wagon, where is your medical personnel, because they move around all the time. It's hard for one person to remember all that in a bigger event. So at the marathon, we've gone to 2 net controls years ago. Just way too much for one person to handle. So with that said, when you are in CS, you're in charge. You're the boss. You're the dispatcher. All traffic goes through you. Don't let somebody push you around and say, no, I need to talk to this guy right now. It just doesn't work that way. You got to be assertive. And some of us, that's hard to do because you got somebody there that's pushy. But don't let them push you around. And if it gets too ridiculous, slow things down. If you've got a situation, just tell people, hold all traffic until I get this taken care of. If you need to take a break for a minute to clear your head, tell people, look, I'm taking, just chill out unless there's an emergency. I need to take a breath of air and stretch my legs. There's nothing wrong with doing that. We're all human. We need a break. I'll reset this. I probably wouldn't have to, but I'm better. And this is not for net control. This is for the people out in the field. When you have a runner, rider, whatever, and somebody's injured, before you call in and say, hey, I need to have a sag wagon for runner 1, 2, 3, 4, and then net control is going to say, well, what's wrong? Well, I don't know. Well, that's waste everybody's time, and it's a waste of air time. Before you call in, assess the situation. Need to know, not the bib number. That's one thing you don't do. You don't put that over the air because then you got family and friends, and they know the bib number, and then all of a sudden they want to know, well, what happened. So one thing we don't do is bib numbers. Need the sex, the age, and the condition. Stub toe, broken toe. Obviously, if he's had a heart attack, you're going to know that right away. And in that case, when it's a serious situation, you're going to holler, break, break, break. So everybody takes a standby. Net controls, ears will perk up a little bit. And like Mike said, we had a guy, well, it wasn't a heart attack. It was cardiac arrest. He was dead right there. So without hams, he'd still be that way. But he's alive and well and kicking and doing good. So I think that's about all I have to add to the list of good advice. KC0QK.
Excellent advice. K0PRB.
N7GES KE0LSL.
Another check-in. Good evening, LSL. Go ahead.
I would like to add that I was with Terry and K0ABK on that site up on Tower, and it was a very well executed interagency, interparticipatory operation. We had a paramedic from Poudre Valley Hospital on scene. We also had a park ranger from Larimer County, and the three of us as radio operators, and we all knew our responsibilities, and it went very, very well. It was just well articulated, and that was my first experience because I'm a kind of a hamette, and so learning from that experience, I learned from the more experienced people, W0ASP and ABK, and it went very well. And I have nothing to do but to praise them for teaching me about those situations. That's my only comment. Back to the net.
So, if you decide to volunteer for this, the people you're people you're volunteering for are going to help you out and make sure you know what's happening. So there you go. Please take that as an encouragement to give it a try as the months come up here and we have some of these events scheduled. This is N7GES with the it's been a long day, folks. I'm sorry. With the NCARC TechNet. Any other comments on this before we open it up to general questions before we close? All right, let's finish this up with, does anybody have any other technical questions? Any subject they'd like to ask before all of us go our separate ways?
KI0KN.
Good evening, James. I'll bet you don't have so much of a question but a comment, and we're welcome it.
Yeah, I'm sorry to join so late, but I'm glad to catch you guys before it was over. I, as you know, don't run a lot of events, but I've run a few, either by being the comm leader or net control or both, or et cetera, and I wanted to expound upon one item that Marty mentioned. He mentioned that we never ever use bib numbers, and I'd like to clarify that a little bit. In his marathon, the Colorado Marathon, that he's the comm leader for, they don't use bib numbers. However, each event may have slightly different rules and or requests for the amateurs. So, for example, Bike MS, the Multiple Sclerosis Society ride that I lead in June, that is all we use is bib numbers to communicate who is involved in whatever. So, yep, I keep timing my own radio out. I guess the main point is that each event is different, so whoever's organizing the event you're volunteering for should clarify all of what is expected, what should be said, what shouldn't be said ahead of time. So just watch for that, make sure you understand what's requested of you, and do your best to follow that. So if you have any questions, certainly reach out to the event coordinator, the person running the hams, ahead of the event. And always, and I think Marty mentioned this, if you have a question, ask net control at any time about anything. Asking a question is better than assuming anything at all. So that was my 2 cents there. Thanks for the time, Kevin. KI0KN, back to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, James. And I appreciate that clarification, too, because I know that in some places bib numbers are requested almost exclusively for just about everything and anything. And I could understand, though, why some coordinators may have asked not to have them used in certain situations. So, yes, it's going to depend on the folks doing the event, and so the coordinators of the event will certainly communicate that to the ham coordinators, and they will in turn communicate that to you, and then all we have to do is follow the instructions that we've been given. So, very good. All right. Any other questions for the net on this topic or any other?
KI0KN with one last one I just thought of, Kevin.
Please go ahead.
So this is mainly for anybody new that has never volunteered for an event or is thinking about it or something like that, and if this was covered earlier, I apologize, but we are always looking for anyone of any skill level, always. We will, if you're just brand new, you're nervous, you don't have the right equipment, you don't have any equipment, we will pair you up with someone that can run you through the ropes. You know, a more experienced person, let you have the mic here and there whenever you're comfortable, and just let you be part of the event that way. If you're either that or you're comfortable on your own and just don't have the equipment, we'll find you loaner equipment. So don't let lack of experience or, you know, nervous that you're going to do it wrong or not have equipment stop you from volunteering. We would love to have you along, and we'll do everything we can. Yeah. So that's all I had there, Kevin, and thanks, KI0KN.
Okay, and yeah, that was sort of stated before, but you stated it differently, and that encouragement is always a good thing, because I know sometimes people are hesitant because they're not sure of their skill levels or not sure of the equipment they have. So do keep that in mind, please, that you're always welcome to volunteer, and I'm sure that any of the coordinators will do their best to find a place where they could use you. So, absolutely excellent. Okay, one more call specifically for questions at this time before we end up running out of time here. Okay, last call for comments.
This is K0PRB.
PRB, go ahead.
Just a quick question as to, during these events, how often is APRS used to track stations?
KI0KN, are you still around? Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I got a quick answer for my events.
Sorry, we had a double. Sorry, Marty, say again.
Well, I say I have a quick answer for my events. We don't use APRS. If people want to use it, and if Net Control's using it, fine. It's not mandatory. And one little quick clarification: the marathon does use bib numbers, but in an event we're getting an ambulance for somebody. We try not to put too much info over the air. You know, the info does get passed once EMS is on scene, and then we can start using names and stuff like that. But let's just say you're going to stag somebody, we'll use a bib number for that. If it's not, if it's non-life-threatening or something, bib number's fine. If it's a touchy situation, that's when we don't use them. Anyway, I bet James had something to say about APRS. KC0QA.
James, are you still with us, James?
Yeah, I sure am. I just didn't want to double over you there. And thanks for the handoff there, Marty. So, Phil, to answer your question, it really depends on the event. In Bike MS that we do in June, it is now a requirement for every mobile. Everybody in a car on the road has APRS. We even put them in the ambulances that don't have hams riding in them. We use it exclusively and extensively for dispatch on that event, and I publish a special APRS setup document with all the documents I hand out to everybody. We have a whole bunch of loaner APRS units that I collect up from various places, and some of my own that we hand out to anyone not running APRS. So that particular event, it's used heavily. You know, it probably makes sense, common sense, but an event that covers lots of distance and people are driving vehicles around are more typically APRS oriented, whereas obviously where you have 5 aid stations and up in the trail marathons and things like that, no vehicles, it's not really used. We use it also for messaging in MS-150, so hopefully that answers your question. let me stand by there and see if I answered everything for you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That answered everything. Because I can see the importance of it, and automatic packet reporting system can also be considered automatic position reporting system when you think about it. But using it for messaging, etc., that is, to me, that is an ideal situation. And I can see where it is not necessary in all situations. Thanks again, both Marty and James. This is K0PRB.
Yeah, and I'll fill in. Besides having one in every mobile, we know there are certain parts of our course that are not terribly well covered with APRS. So for event weekend, we stick temporary units in certain places that will either digipeat or digipeat and iGate both for excellent course coverage. But you're absolutely right, as far as, the event kind of drives the need for it. So, great, thanks for the question. KI0K, and back to you, Kevin.
Excellent questions. Thank you. All right. I keep saying last call, and more keep coming up, so I'm glad we're having a good discussion. Any other questions about this or anything, any other topics before we close? All right. I would like to propose a topic for next week, and I would like to hear some yay or nay responses. Let me grab it here first. DIY radio systems. Keith kits, microbit-X, others, kits, that sort of thing. Have any of you used those and would like to chat about them? Are any of you interested in using those types of things and have never tried them before and might like to hear a discussion about them? Is there enough interest about this to go ahead and have a discussion next week? Any comments?
W0DDZ, I'm a yay.
M0AMP, I'd love to learn more about the microbit-X.
You can count us in, K0PRB and K0LAO.
W0ASP, I don't have any experience, but I would like to learn. KB0SCX, yay.
Well, I think that's good enough to say let's go ahead and do it. So with that in mind, any of you who do have experience, and EMP, I know you've worked with some other things, maybe not so much home built, but you've certainly fiddled with the SDRs and you've put programs together. I think that sort of qualifies. Any of you who have done some work with these, I'd love to have you show up, and maybe I can make some calls or to others who have done this to see about getting them in here. Or if you know of people who have done some of these, worked with some of these radios, old or new, get them to join us, and let's find out what we can find out about them. I'm terribly interested in the microbit-X, as well as the other bit-X models as well. And there's lots of other kits out there that are available as well. So hopefully it will lead to a good discussion. I hope that this is something that interests a lot of people, as it sounds like it will. So I'm going to clear the net this evening, and I thank you all very much for participating and ending up making a good discussion out of this. I do hope that several new folks will volunteer for some of these events that we need communications for this summer, and find that they just enjoy it immensely, for not only for the radio communications, but for lots of reasons, as was stated in the beginning here. I will look forward to visiting with you next week about DIY radios and kits and other things. And 73 for now, and thank you all very much again. This is N7GES, now clear.
N7GES, quick question.
This presentation was brought to you by the North